When I first heard about Front Mission Evolved, I couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and apprehension. After all, the idea of finally stepping into a Wanzer cockpit sounded like a dream come true. But dreams don't always survive the harsh reality of execution, especially when that dream comes hot on the heels of my last video, which covered what's arguably the series' low point, Left Alive. To me, it's not surprising that people would have dreamed of a true Wanzer simulator, something that could bring the thrill of piloting one of these iconic machines directly into their hands. Front Mission has always been about the meticulous tactical planning of war, but what if you could experience the chaos and intensity of battle firsthand? The thought of stepping into a Wanzer cockpit, feeling the weight of its movements, managing its systems, and making split-second decisions in the heat of battle is both exhilarating and a little bit terrifying. It's not just about the machines themselves either. The world of Front Mission, with its serious tone, political intrigue, and complex conflicts, feels like the perfect setting for something more immersive. A game that takes the tactical potential of the series and transforms it into a visceral, hands-on experience. Honestly, even now, I still want that. The idea of commanding a Wanzer in the thick of combat, rather than carefully orchestrating its moves from a bird's eye view, sounds like a dream come true. But dreams, as we know, don't always translate well into reality. And that's what brings us to Front Mission Evolved. Now, unlike Left Alive, a game that's not just underdeveloped but teetering on the edge of being downright broken, Front Mission Evolved occupies a more complicated space. It's not outright bad, but it's certainly not great either. It's the kind of game that splits opinions right down the middle, offering an almost equal measure of elements to either love or hate, or if you're like me, to somehow both love and hate at the same time. It's a game that screams 2010s from every angle, undeniably a product of its era, for better or worse. From its mechanics to its presentation, it feels like it's chasing the trends of the time.
This is Sergeant Adela Sewell of the 72nd Mobile Company. All civilians must leave this combat area immediately.
Don't worry, I'll leave. As soon as I get my dad out of the NSRL building.
Give me a break.
Trying to carve out a space in the crowded landscape of third-person action games. The result, a game that's more divisive than definitive, caught in a strange limbo between innovation and compromise. And as expected, Square Enix had their hands all over it. For reasons only they know, they handed this beloved series to a relatively obscure developer, Double Helix. This was a studio with only a handful of titles to its name, none of which exactly set the world on fire. I mean, at this point, the only games under their belt had been Silent Hill Homecoming and G.I. Joe The Rise of Cobra, a game that Silent Hill fans universally agree was poor and a cheap cash-in licensed game. It isn't exactly the kind of pedigree that screams, we're ready to redefine a legendary Japanese mech series. Clearly, Square Enix was looking to save a few bucks here. Anyhow, let's not waste any more time on that. I'm sure the comment section is going to be rife with anti-Square Enix sentiment, something I'm finally starting to understand whilst looking at series like Front Mission. So let's get to where most game review videos start, with the story. Despite being penned by a distinctly Japanese team of writers, there's something surprisingly not Japanese about the storytelling in Front Mission Evolved. When you consider the talent involved, Motomo Terayama, known for directing Final Fantasy X2, the entirety of the Final Fantasy XIII series, and now co-directing the Final Fantasy VII Remake series, and Daisuke Watanabe, who contributed heavily to the Kingdom Hearts series and wrote the lead scenario for Final Fantasy XIII, you'd expect something more daring or unconventional. These two have spent decades working on polarizing projects that have sparked countless debates in gaming communities, so it's fair to say they're no strangers to experimental narratives. That's why it's so strange to see Evolved's story feel so safe. For all their flaws, at least games like Final Fantasy X2 or the labyrinthine storytelling of Kingdom Hearts take risks. Those games deliver narratives with a unique flair that you just don't often see in North American games. There's an undeniable personal touch beneath it all, an embrace of the outlandish, and a willingness to push boundaries, even if it means splitting opinions. In contrast, Western studios often seem overly preoccupied with investor satisfaction, or more recently, avoiding online backlash. Risk-taking in games has largely fallen to independent developers who, let's face it, don't have billion-dollar companies breathing down their necks about ROI. Of course, this is just a roundabout way of me saying that Front Mission Evolved, it doesn't take risks. It's disappointing because the storytelling is an area where even thinner games can shine. Take Nair for example. Say what you will about its gameplay, but its narrative captured people and gave the game a legendary status. Evolved, on the other hand, feels as though it was meticulously engineered to cater to what American audiences might have wanted in 2010. Worse yet, one with an attention span no longer than a sneeze. We've got a young hero thrust into a heroic role who just so happens to be a tech genius. A quirky glasses-wearing sidekick who whines and pouts in that quote-unquote cute way. A secondary female character who hides the pain of her tragic past behind anger. Gothy bad guys complete with a femme fatale whose designs lean heavily into tight leather and exposed skin. An apparently deceased father linked to cutting-edge technology that drives the plot. It's a trope checklist that wouldn't feel out of place in an early 2000s Marvel cartoon or one of the countless cookie-cutter shooters flooding the market at the time. And all of this is shoehorned into the Front Mission universe, which is what really makes this all so frustrating. Dylan Ramsey, our protagonist, is practically the embodiment of every generic, young, hot-headed hero of the era. He's the guy who just happens to be exactly what the military needs at the precise moment they need it. Naturally, he's also impulsive, making rash decisions to throw himself into danger because he's determined to avenge his father's mysterious death, or maybe just to prove himself. Either way, Dylan feels more like an archetype than a character, and it's hard to invest in his journey when he's so predictable. The supporting cast doesn't fare much better. Adela at least has some depth. Her backstory ties to the villains and the Edge technology, giving her a meaningful connection to Dylan. However, only halfway through the game, the writers decided to pull a sudden and jarring romance between her and Dylan seemingly out of nowhere. Then there's Amy, the glasses-wearing, smoky-eyed tech nerd whose entire personality feels ripped from the manic pixie dream girl handbook. She's quirky in that awkward, contrived way that teenage boys supposedly found irresistible back in the day. For the longest time, I wasn't even sure if she was supposed to be Dylan's sister or not, given the fact that she sort of dips in and out of the story without any real reason to be there. Then there are the villains. Marcus, the guy with his broody, gothy Wanzer, feels completely out of place in the Front Mission universe. He's not just a bad fit, he's like a caricature that wandered in from another game entirely. Then there's his girlfriend. Her introduction, boobs first, wrapped in a leather cybergoth outfit that might as well have marketing to teenage boys chugging Mountain Dew and munching Doritos stamped across it. But why stop there? The game throws in 2 more mech piloting femme fatales just to hammer home Evolve's obsession with this trope. It's ridiculous.
Isn't it beautiful? And think how it will sound when I add their screams to my chorus of destruction!
O Valkyrie, grant me the strength to deliver the souls of the non-believers.
Fighting them feels like squaring off against Harley Quinn in the Battletech universe. Yeah, it's that contrasting. But before you roll your eyes and think I'm about to launch into some grand social critique, don't worry, that's just not my thing. What frustrates me is that Front Mission has always been this series about thoughtful, dialogue-heavy storytelling and deep character dynamics. It didn't matter what the characters looked like, where they came from, or what their backstories were, they always had substance. Here, you're handed the barest bones of characterization. Dylan's the pilot, Amy's the techie, Adela's the tragic wildcard, and every other female character, just eye candy. Look, I don't have an issue with edgy or sexy character designs in video games, not at all. But if you're going to do that, at least give the characters some reason to exist beyond being the sexy tuna in a heavily armed tuna can. Any potential for interesting characterization gets buried under cliches and tired tropes. It's such a shame because Front Mission has always excelled at telling complex human stories set against the backdrop of war. Here, all that nuance and depth has been stripped away, leaving a shallow, focus grouped narrative. Honestly, I hate to admit it, but Left Alive, yes, Left Alive, had a far more compelling world and story. It's just a shame that literally everything else in that game was broken. Wedged between all of this are briefings that feel completely out of place in a story that's pretty much character driven. These briefings don't add anything meaningful, they're just here to awkwardly show the passage of time during Evolve's very confusing conflict, and trust me, it is confusing. There are multiple factions at play, but instead of fleshing them out, the game reduces them to nothing more than acronyms. You can't go 10 minutes without hearing at least 2 or 3 acronyms tossed around. Even Edge, the game's bullet time mechanic, is an acronym. The thing is, these factions barely exist outside of a handful of throwaway characters who pop in and out of the story. It feels like the writers had a bigger plan for them early on, but by the second act, they just gave up. Characters who seemed important get dropped entirely, and whatever political intrigue the story was building gets completely derailed by one man, Cornelius.
Now, you're mine.
Cornelius swoops in out of nowhere and hijacks the narrative, shifting the focus entirely to himself and the Edge system. Apparently, it's not just some combat-enhancing tech, it's also a tool for mind-controlling Wanzer pilots, because why not? Cornelius is cartoonishly evil, and the actor playing him just can't make it work. His performance swings between over-the-top camp and lifeless delivery, and it's hard to take him seriously.
Oh, Dylan Ramsey. We meet again.
This time, things are going to be different.
That's right. I would think you'd be a bit more emotional. What with the death of your father and all.
But honestly, it's not his fault. The script gives him nothing to work with. That's true for the whole cast, really. The voice acting ranges from, that's fine, to please make it stop.
Dylan, you must believe me. The Edge I sought to create is not a tool for killing. Edge can save lives.
And again, I don't blame the actors. They were handed a script so uninspired that even the most talented voice actor would have struggled to make it engaging. And then there's the ending. I'm not giving any spoilers for people who want to play it, but oh boy, by the time you reach the final act, the story completely falls apart. Characters who were set up as secondary villains, or at least antagonists with their own agendas, suddenly decide to help you. And how does this happen? Is there a dramatic scene where alliances are forged, where tensions are resolved? No, it's all explained in a weird briefing. Just a casual, oh by the way, they're on your side now. Honestly, it's nonsensical. There's no reason for any of it, it just happens. Thankfully, the story is almost the worst thing about Front Mission Evolved. That's because, surprisingly, I actually enjoyed the gameplay. Well, at least when I was piloting a Wanzer. And don't worry, we'll get to those abysmal on-foot sections soon enough. Wanzer combat in Evolved is straightforward. There's little to no strategy involved. You'll be running barrels hot for the 5 to 6 hours it takes to finish the game. Outgun whatever's in front of you and you're golden. If you try to approach combat with too much strategy, that's just asking for frustration, since most of the gadgets in your arsenal are fun to play with, but ultimately pretty useless. Enemies either rush at you or snipe you from a distance, and while the formula isn't exactly deep, it works well enough. And I did actually like it. I had fun. There's nothing inherently bad about the Wanzer gameplay, but there's not much to gush about either. It's serviceable. It plays like your average third-person shooter with a giant robot skin. Now, I've seen people compare this game to Armored Core, but let's be real, this is not trying to be Armored Core, not even close. You've got health pickups, ammo crates, a linear storyline, and get this, you actually see people outside of their mechs. To me, this game feels way closer to something like Mech Assault than Armored Core. Don't believe me? Compare the two side by side. If anything, if this game had been Mech Assault 3, I think it would have been better received. The plotline and gameplay style would have fit that series far more naturally. Honestly, even some of the faction elements in this game feel more like Battletech factions than anything tied to Front Mission. Visually, I can understand the comparisons to Armored Core, with the hover and quad leg designs, but that's about it. Customization is another area where Evolved works pretty well, albeit in a very simple way. You can go wild with your loadouts without worrying too much about punishment. Almost everything you can equip is viable in combat. The only exception are some of the backpacks, which don't all have universal utility. Most of the time, you'll probably stick to a combo or power backpack to maximize your ammo reserves and mobility. Though annoyingly, certain levels force you into using certain parts, mostly legs. And while I get it for an area where it's required to hover because of water, I don't understand why you absolutely must use quad legs when they first arrive in the game. Weapons, they fall into standard categories, with many of their names and designs borrowing from equipment in previous Front Mission games. The formula is simple. Slap a weapon on your Wanzer, shoot stuff, bash stuff, or if you're feeling fancy, shield bash stuff. It's not exactly rocket science. What's nice though is the ability to tweak your loadout mid-game. If something isn't working, you can adjust your setup at the death screen and jump back to a checkpoint even mid-battle. And thank God for that, because the later boss fights of this game are downright brutal. Being able to do this really takes a bit of annoyance off these sections. When I first started Front Mission Evolved, I kept hearing about how unbalanced the bosses were, how they'd rip me to shreds. For the first half of the game though, it didn't seem too bad. Bosses were mostly your typical bullet sponge encounters. It wasn't hard to just lay into them or spam them with a rifle. Then I hit the battle with Cornelius and everything changed. Things escalated quickly after that. The Fafnir boss, amazing. A huge hulking monster that's as intimidating as it is cool. But after that, one-shots became the norm. The later bosses don't mess around. They'll target your torso directly and sometimes take you out before you even get a chance to move. It's frustrating. You have to be ready to adjust your loadout constantly to adapt to these sudden spikes in difficulty. Still, it's hard not to feel like the game's balance could have been better tuned, especially since the best bet is usually to cheese the hell out of these encounters. And of course, I can't move on without talking about the game's edge system, the game's last-ditch effort to stay trendy with the times. Essentially, it's slow-mo bullet time. And let me tell you, it makes absolutely no sense no matter how much you squint and try to justify it. Edge is a superpower dressed up as a system. It's something that certain pilots can just do because they have it, and it gives you the ability to slow everything down so you can magically shoot more. Let's not even try to figure out how that would work in a Wanzer. Wanzers are machines where weight, power levels, and mechanics actually matter. So if they can move or fire that fast, why wouldn't they just be doing it all the time? You're telling me that I can slap software into my mech and suddenly a Wanzer is capable of defying the laws of physics. It's not technology, it's straight up magic. And the game treats it like the ultimate game changer, both in gameplay and, as I've said, the narrative. It somehow becomes the crux of everything that happens, affecting every character, every faction, and every situation. And to be honest, I barely used it. Most of the time, I completely forgot it was even a thing. Even during boss battles, I never felt like I actually needed it. It's there, but it's never essential, even during the most difficult of bosses. This is partially because it takes just a little too long for it to build up, and by the time you're done unloading the amount of ammo the game wants you in order to build up the gauge, you're already done the section or boss. That, or you've already found a better, more effective way to progress. Now, let's talk about the walking sections. They are bad. Like playing a cheap mobile game bad. They're underdeveloped and honestly feel like they belong in an entirely different, much worse game. In fact, I couldn't shake the feeling that these walking segments were somehow the spiritual precursor to Left Alive. The awkward movement, clunky shooting mechanics, and lifeless enemy AI feel like a direct precursor to the disaster that game became. But at least Front Mission Evolved doesn't force stealth on you during these sections, so there's that small mercy. Again, these parts are just bad. There's nothing fun, engaging, or even remotely tolerable about them. It almost feels like their entire purpose was to justify cramming in even more collectibles, because what better way to pad out an already tedious section than to have you wander around looking for pointless junk. And yes, Front Mission Evolved is absolutely stuffed with collectibles, an absolute bevy of them in fact. Sensors to destroy, emblems to hunt down, data keys to grab, and even the occasional random oddity thrown in for good measure. And what's your grand reward for all this effort? As far as I can tell, just some extra cash and a handful of achievements. That's it. If you're that desperate for cash in Evolved, you're honestly better off just replaying an act, which can net you a decent chunk without all the mindless scavenger hunting. I'd love to complain more about how unnecessary and out of place this feels in a mech game, but honestly, this was just par for the course back then. The early 2010s were absolutely plagued by meaningless collectibles shoehorned into games, no matter how much or how little sense they made. It was a clear and obvious way to pad out gameplay time and keep achievement hunters playing. It still is.
You can't defeat me without edge. If I must kill a Dalek for you to understand that.
When it comes to the graphics, Front Mission Evolved does a solid job of presenting itself during both gameplay and cutscenes. Visually, the game holds up fairly well for its time, especially in the design of the Wanzers. I have to give credit where it's due, Double Helix designers did a commendable job bringing these mechs to life. Despite the numerous changes made to their movement and overall feel, the Wanzers still retain a lot of DNA from the original games. The team even smartly bumped the timeline forward by 44 years, providing a convenient excuse for introducing new technologies or changes in their designs. Moving on to the character designs, this is where everything starts to feel a bit off. The characters are expressive, sure, but they lean heavily into a cartoony style that feels completely out of step with the story's history. If you're familiar with artists like Yoshitaka Amano or Yosuke Naora, who contributed to previous entries in the Front Mission series, not to mention their legendary work on the Final Fantasy games, you'll immediately notice the disconnect. Amano's ethereal, dreamlike designs and Naora's nuanced, character-driven art styles are nowhere to be found here. Instead, the characters in Evolved feel like they were plucked straight out of a mid-2000s American animated series. Nothing about the characters' designs here feel authentically Front Mission. There's this odd generic quality to their appearance that seems to be chasing popular Western trends at the time, and I think this design choice speaks volumes to about who this game was really made for. Digging into the credits, it becomes pretty clear why this is the case. The top credited designer, David O. Hall, doesn't appear to have worked on anything else of note. Actually, if the internet is to be believed, nothing at all. In fact, nearly all of the concept and character design work was handled in-house by Double Helix staff, most of whom came from backgrounds rooted in Double Helix's own games. These resumes show professional experience, sure, but none of it aligns to the kind of artistic legacy that defined Front Mission. To be fair, I'm not saying the artists behind this game are untalented. Their work is polished, professional, and well written within the standards of the time, but it's also safe, bordering on generic. There's a kind of sanitized mass market appeal to the designs that lacks the unique identity you'd expect from a Front Mission title. It's like they were trying to appeal to a completely different audience, and in doing so, they lost what made the series visually distinctive in the first place. This goes for the audio too. Even the composer for Front Mission Evolved's soundtrack, Gary Scheinman, gave what I'd call a very uninspired description of his own work. He described the music as orchestral and mostly tonal, which, let's be honest, is basically the musical equivalent of saying it's a painting with colors. To his credit, Scheinman was the first non-Japanese composer to the series, and he aimed to bring a more orchestral touch to the Front Mission franchise. But here's the problem, I couldn't tell you a single memorable thing about the soundtrack. As soon as I shut the game down, the music just vanishes from my memory. It's just there. Generic background noise that could have been lifted from any military theme shooter of the 2010s. Sure, it's technically competent and it fits the tone of the game, but it's also painfully forgettable. And as it turns out, Scheinman didn't even listen to the music from previous Front Mission titles while composing. This wasn't a creative oversight, it was by design. Square Enix didn't want the soundtrack to feel connected to the series. They were pushing for Evolve to be a departure, to stand apart from what came before. In that mindset, Square Enix's apparent need to make this game not feel like a Front Mission game is at the core of why this title feels the way it does. They didn't want to just modernize Front Mission, they wanted to retool it into something entirely different, and honestly, that's a terrible decision. Front Mission already had a niche audience in North America, albeit not a massive one. By trying to reinvent the wheel, Square likely alienated the longtime fans who actually cared about the series. It's as if Square was more interested in mimicking trends than in actually crafting something worthy of the Front Mission name. Actually, it's exactly that. And that leads me to the big question. If Square didn't want this to feel like a Front Mission game, then why did they bother making it one? To me, it seems like all the resources that went into this project could have been better spent on something original. At least then, people wouldn't have so much to compare it to, and maybe, just maybe, it would have found its own identity instead of being a watered down version of something it never wanted to be. I don't know, that's just how I feel about it. What about you? What are your thoughts on Front Mission Evolved and, more broadly, the state of the Front Mission series these days? Let me know down in the comments below. Anyway, you know how it goes. I've been Kei-Nova. If you've enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.